Good evening. Namaste. And welcome to this evening's class on the art and science of Raja Yoga. This evening we're going to be talking about the concept of energy and willpower. Now this is a very interesting topic, and I'd like to pick up where we left off last week. If you remember, in our previous lesson we were discussing affirmations and we were discussing habits, and I used an image that I'll bring back in this discussion this evening. I spoke about habits being very similar to a hillside upon which the rain is falling. And if that hillside is very smooth, the rain will fall and it'll in an orderly way, it'll run off that hillside. But slowly, as the rain continues to fall, it'll begin to channelize that water that comes down. And soon the water will begin to flow into small rivulets. Those small rivulets, as it proceeds down the hillside, will begin to gather into even larger streams. And eventually, if it rains hard enough and long enough, quite a river or creek, nala might be created and channelize that flow. Well, in a similar way, habits are like that. Habits are this rain that repeatedly begin to form into small streams, and as we continue that habit, it begins to dig deeper into that hillside and become entrenched. And so, as soon as the rain comes, it immediately goes into that channel. And so it is with our habits. Now, the question that comes from that image is, what is this rain that is coming down and creating those channels? And if we look within ourselves, what is it that is channelizing to create those habits? And this leads us to a discussion of energy. Energy that is flowing through us, life force that is flowing through us, prana, use that word, prana is flowing through us. This is the essence of what is behind those habits and behind all of our actions. It is said, commonly, if we look within ourselves, and you'll see how this saying is so, that we think and then we have action. If I want to move my arm, I first have the thought in my mind that I would like to move my arm, and somehow then my arm goes up. What is the connecting link between action and thought? It's energy, it's life force, it's this prana. Between consciousness and matter, we have that connection of life force between those two. And for us to understand yoga, particularly in a practical sense of how we apply yoga in daily life, we must discuss this concept of energy. And not only must we discuss it, we need to gain control over that energy. And this is the essence of the science that many of you know about, pranayama. This is what we are doing when we try to control that energy flow. We try to direct it in one direction or direct it in another. If you look in your life, you look at other people in your life, you perhaps look back on yourself, situations in your life, you'll notice that some people are more successful than other people. Some people are able to accomplish something, great things perhaps, even yourself from time to time. Sometimes you have that ability to get things done, and other times not. What is the ingredient that is common in successful people? Now, there's more than one, and we've talked about some of these already, but certainly one of the qualities that is found in successful people is they have energy. They're energetic. You don't find a lazy person being highly successful in life. And those people that can express that energy. Now, you find, of course, that many people have great energy and they're not necessarily successful. For example, a small child 5 years old, 6-year-old young boy running in circles in the yard, in your backyard, may have tremendous amounts of energy, but yet you can't say that he's a successful young man yet, because he hasn't yet learned to direct that energy toward some end. And so consequently, when we speak about energy, we need to speak on it from a couple different perspectives. We have energy, the ability to summon up that energy within ourselves, and the ability to direct that energy and to focus that life force toward some end. Now, this is what leads to success. So consequently, if you look at a businessman who's been very successful, you'll see he has lots of energy, but he also has the ability to focus that energy. And what is another word for focusing our energy or focusing our life force? Concentration. So consequently, you have energy, you have to have concentration, but we will also see that something further is needed beyond those two. We need to have that energy, we need to control that energy, but there's something that precedes control, and I've mentioned this in previous classes already, and so I'll bring it up again because it is a common thread that passes through all of the discussion of yoga. Awareness. Awareness precedes control. If we want to control something, in this case, let's say our life force, prana flowing within this body, if we want to be able to control that, we first must be aware of that life force within us. And from awareness, yes, okay, I can feel I have life force. I'm aware of a situation. I'm aware of my environment. I want to change something in my environment. Well, if I'm not aware of what it is I want to change, how can I possibly go about changing it? So we need to have awareness. We need to have control of that life force. And then we need to be able to focus that life force. And we put these together and we find that the end result is success. And so this is what you could say is a basic foundation principle in the science of yoga. And often, as you know, in the study of pranayama, that this is a very important aspect. Now, of course, when people think about pranayama, they think about breath control, breathing exercises, left and right nostrils, and so on. And a little bit later, I'll get into that as to why that is related to this. But the larger science of pranayama is more than breath. The larger science of pranayama is learning to control the life force. Now, we began this discussion a few weeks ago also with a definition of yoga is neutralization of the waves of likes and dislikes of citta, but also as a transcendence of ego consciousness, learning to be able to transcend that individual ego. What is ego? Ego is the soul's identification. We are identifying in this sense of I with this body, with this personality. In a physical sense or a metaphysical sense, we could say that ego is the life force within this body going outward through the senses to identify with this material reality. It's a downward flow. It's an outward flow of life force. This is ego consciousness. And so pranayama, yoga, is learning to redirect that flow by controlling that flow from outward toward ego consciousness to inward and upward. And ultimately, not just upward in a general sense, but specifically upward toward the brain. So if we want to be able to direct that up to the brain And then in life force in the brain itself is a function of awareness. If we want to be more aware, we want to have more life force flowing up in the brain, and particularly toward the frontal lobes of the brain. Now, how to do this is not the subject of this discourse, but I think many of you have taken our Level 1 class series of how to learn to meditate. And if you haven't, I would certainly recommend that, because this will give you practical applications and practical techniques of how to direct that life force up to the brain to be able to learn to concentrate. And this is the essence of our Hong Sa technique of meditation. This is bringing life force up into the brain, and in the process of doing that, we're becoming aware. And at the same time, by keeping it here and focusing that attention at the point between the eyebrows, we're learning to concentrate. And so this is an essential base technique that we must learn to practice to be able to put this philosophy that we're talking about into practice, into actual manifestation. If we do this, we'll find that success will follow. It's an ingredient of success. And naturally, of course, there are other elements that will make success possible, but you'll also find that a successful person, I don't mean success necessarily in a material way in terms of monetary gain, although that's could also be there, but I mean success in terms of a successful life. And you'll find that that is accompanied by a rising and an increasing sense of happiness. And so if we want to be happy, we need to be aware, we need to have concentration, and we need to have energy. And you'll find that the opposite is also true. Although there is a certain tendency within us to want to be lazy, we want to, I just want to relax, I just want to sit and enjoy myself by doing nothing. You might say a sinking down into a subconscious state, although that has a certain attraction because it relieves tension, perhaps physical tension, and momentarily it's enjoyable. In the long run, we know that laziness will not lead us to happiness. I had a very interesting, funny story, a little bit experience. Years ago, I was teaching a meditation class, and it was the first night of the class, and it was at my introduction, and I asked anybody if they had been practicing in their own way meditation. And one gentleman raised his hand, and he said, "Oh yes, I have a very good meditation practice already." And I said, "Oh, well, please share. What are you doing?" He says, "Well, you see, I come home at night, and after a hard day's work, and I sit I'm in my lounge chair, big chair that he had. I sit in my lounge chair and I lean back. I put on soft music, and I mix myself a drink of soda water and whiskey, and I lean back, listen to that, drink my whiskey, and relax. And that's my meditation." And now he was serious too. I think. I'm not sure. Maybe he was joking with me. But this is a common thought that people have, that my pathway to happiness is to sink into a subconscious state, is to retreat. And many people say, yes, I want to take a retreat from this world of busyness. And a spiritual retreat in their mind is to go lie on the beach and relax. Now, that has its place for a little while, but we all know that we can't live our lives that way. We have to be energetic. We have those people who are expansive in their energy, to including others, and are able to uplift their energy not just in a restless way, but in a focused way towards the accomplishment of something in harmony with a larger purpose. These are the people that will be happy. Now, energy is something that we want to become aware of just for these practical purposes, but we want to also learn about energy for a deeper reason as well. We as yogis are trying to become aware of subtler realities. We're trying to become aware of divine realities within ourselves. I've mentioned some of these in the past weeks: light, love, sound, the Om vibration, a sense of understanding of life, wisdom, if you will, peace. We want to gain calmness. All of these things we want. Energy itself is a divine concept. If you think about energy, meditate upon the concept, we think about it in physical terms. But when we see something happen, it's the result of the energy. It's not the energy itself. Energy is not a substantial reality. It's not a physical reality. It's a subtle reality. Modern science tells us that energy is a manifestation, you might say, of matter itself. E equals mc squared. The masters tell us that energy has even a subtler reality of consciousness. It's an expression of consciousness. So it's not substantial in a material sense. It has a divine reality to it. It's that expression in this everyday life of that cosmic creative force of the universe. This universe was created by the divine energy of Om. And that energy in our daily life is a expression of that divine energy. And so if we can become aware of it, we also, by extension, will learn to become aware of these other aspects of Om as well. And we start with energy because it's, you might say, the lowest octave of that. It's a more accessible octave of those divine qualities because we can experience energy more easily than we can some of these others. For example, if I want to tense my arm, I can tense it and I can feel that tension. Now the tension itself is not the energy, it's the result of that energy. But yet by learning to direct energy to my arm and then learning to withdraw that energy from my arm, relaxing, I begin to attune myself to that I have an ability to control that force of energy. And slowly but surely, I will, if I practice, I will learn to become aware of that energy, and I will actually begin to feel that energy flowing within the body. And this is the essence of yoga on a deeper level of Kriya Yoga as well. In Kriya Yoga, we want to become aware of that flow of energy, of life force within the spine, feel its movements, and in a later lesson I'll explain, we want to be able to rotate that energy in the spine in such a way that it begins to withdraw the life force away from the senses. So we start with energy, but with that entry point, we then learn to become aware of larger realities. Paramahansa Yogananda began his discussion of the science of yoga with new students with this discussion of energy. And he actually designed a series of exercises. He called them the energization exercises to energize the body, to bring life force into the body, to be able to make it energetic for practical purposes of health, to give us the ability to express that energy outwardly, to be more efficient and happy in our lives, all of those reasons. But also, he started that discussion of yoga with energy so that we would learn to become aware of it. And there's a series of 39 exercises that those of you who have taken our introductory level 1 course, the meditation side of it and also the energization side of it, have learned. These are very important exercises. But the principle of the exercises, which you have heard many times if you've taken them and you've been involved in this tradition, is the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. And we learn from this aphorism that there is a relationship between the will and the energy. So learning to energize the body, learning to control the body, learning to focus that energy is also learning to use the will, to be able to focus the will, to be able to strengthen the will, and to be able to direct our individual will toward some end. And so here we're discussing not only awareness, concentration, life force, energy, but we're also must add this fourth element, the individual will that each of us have. And that individual will is extremely critical, extremely important for us to be able to accomplish anything in life. Paramahansa Yogananda said, in any action that we do, there is some spark of will. If we want to, we don't think of it consciously, but yet where there is will, there is life. And when life departs, or when will departs, life itself departs. Now, what is will? Willpower. We often speak of it in that way. Will is defined as desire, individual desire, or perhaps if we don't want to use the word desire, intention. I intend, an intention to do something. Intention plus energy directed toward fulfillment. So let me say that again. Will is desire plus energy directed toward fulfillment. Now, there are many types of will, and you see then the first type would be blind will. People have their will is blind in the sense that what they're doing is they're not consciously directing. They're doing something. Their blind will is, you could even say for most people, breathing is an expression of blind will. We're not aware of it so much, but subconsciously we are directing that. But if a little bit more advanced expression of that will is will that's directed through impulse. I have a desire, very strong desire, sensual desire to do something. I want to, in the middle of the night, I want to go into the refrigerator and eat that piece of cake that I saw left there. We can't go back to sleep until we do it. And so we're just impulse, you might say, to do that. And you can expand on that concept as you will in your own life. And a young person who has no wisdom, you can see oftentimes in their life they're very impulsive. They're not thinking about things, and children do things out of impulse. This is will that is not directed consciously. Now, we then, after a period of time, can refine that will to a conscious will. It's a will that is directed by our thought. The intellect, you might say. We want to accomplish something and we think about it. And now this does not mean that we're going to do actions that are necessarily good for us. We still may wake up in the middle of the night and we're laying in bed and we're thinking about that piece of cake in the refrigerator. And we think, yes, rather than just impulsively doing this, we think about it and we think, should I, shouldn't I know it's not good for me, so on. But then we think about it and then we get up out of bed and we go and we eat that piece of cake. That's, you might say, conscious will, but of course we can also direct that conscious will toward things that are good for us. We come to a yoga class, we begin to think, I am going to meditate. I'm going to improve my situation. Or perhaps more generally, I want to be successful in life. I want to be happy in life. And so we begin to make conscious decisions that are going to take us in one direction or another. And those conscious decisions are directed by some sense of right and wrong and what's going to lead me in the right direction. And slowly that conscious will begins to be guided even a little bit more and a little bit more better. There's also another type of will, and this is known as superconscious will. This is will that is attuned to a larger divine will. Now, this is a discussion for another class in the future, is in how to follow intuitive guidance, how to attune ourselves to divine will. But I'll leave that for a future class on attunement. But the superconscious will is, you might say, divine will itself. What is trying to happen, and attuning ourselves to that larger flow of will in this world. This is what all of us are trying to do. But we have to begin by learning to become conscious, by learning to awaken ourselves. And that implies learning to be aware. We have to increase our awareness to be able to consciously use our will and to concentrate that will in order to accomplish something toward fulfillment. Now, there's a certain secret, you might say. I wouldn't say secret is not quite the right word, but it's something that is little known, perhaps, is that will is a muscle. Now, when we go to school as children, we take physical exercise classes, physical education, and we're taught by our teachers how to improve our life and how to be more healthy, how to improve the various muscles in the body. But how often is it taught to improve and strengthen this muscle, the muscle of the will? But it too is a muscle that needs to be strengthened. Now, a good way to do that, of course, is just like when if you want to strengthen the muscles in your arms, you lift weights, and you start with little small weights, and of course it causes perhaps a little discomfort the next day, tension, tightness, but then slowly you get larger and larger, and pretty soon you become very strong in body. It's the same thing with will. The masters say, take something in your life that you want to accomplish that maybe is a little bit difficult for you, and apply your will to it and accomplish it. And then slowly, little by little, take on bigger accomplishments. One of the destructive things of will is to say, I'm going to do something, and then you don't do it. If you say you're going to do something, do it, because it's an exercise of will. If you form the habit of not doing what you set your intention to do, oh, I don't do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, it's too hard. Oh, I don't need to do that. And soon you find that that habit begins to form and your will becomes weakened. Swami Kriyananda was like this. When he said he would do something, he made it a point to always do it, just as a demonstration of will, not necessarily for others, but for his own self. I knew him, I met him 1968, and so he passed in 2013. And so it's 45 years or something close to that. And he took many different classes, leading different things of that nature, thousands of them. And I certainly attended. I don't know if I attended thousands of them, but I certainly attended hundreds of them. And in all of that time, if he said he was going to be somewhere and do something and take that class, he did it. He did it. I can only remember maybe less than a handful of times when he said he was going to be there and do it that he wasn't able to do it. And the reason he didn't do it, not because he was not wanting to or changed his mind arbitrarily, is because circumstances beyond his control prevented him from fulfilling what he said he would do. A couple of times he became very seriously ill. He could not get out of bed. Other times there were circumstances he couldn't prevented him from reaching the venue. But I know there were many times when he was ill and he had promised to be at a class, to do that class, and people were saying, "So Swamiji, no, you shouldn't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. You're not feeling well." And he'd say, "No, I said I was going to be there. I will be there." I remember one time he had said he wanted to go to the store in another village close by to buy a newspaper. And as circumstances happened, he did not need to go to do that. He didn't, and it was something that was not necessary for him to do. Perhaps there was another newspaper had shown up, and he asked his driver, he says, "Take me to the. I want to go buy that newspaper." He says, "Swami, you don't need to. We're here. It's no need for it any longer." And he said, "No, I said I was going to go get that newspaper earlier this day. I'm going to do it. I want to fulfill that." And this was how he lived his life. Now, and he developed through that practice of doing what his word, giving his word to something, a tremendous amount of will. He was a very, very willful person in that way, but not in an egoic way. He had a strength that came with that. Now, will is something that we have within ourselves. We develop that muscle of willpower within ourselves. But the part, and that is not the part I said that is not well known. I think people can understand that. The part that's less known is that the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. Remember, if I have a very strong will, I can manifest and put into motion a great deal of energy. But there's also, and this is the secret of true success, is my individual will can be supplemented by the life force and the energy of the universe itself. So it's not just my will that I bring to bear, my limited amount of energy or life force that I have within this body. And some have more, some have less. Not do I just bring this limited amount of life force to bear upon a situation. If my will is strengthened and my will is properly directed, now that's a question, proper direction of my will. But we find to some degree, and the more attuned we are, the more results we will have. But when I direct my energy, my will properly, I supplement it by the energy of the universe, of the cosmos itself around me. Paramahansa Yogananda, I believe, or as part of this tradition of Kriya Yoga through Paramahansa Yogananda, his guru, and Lirahiri Mahashaya Babaji, this tradition, I believe, is the only one that I have encountered that mentions this point, that the seat of ego resides in the medulla oblongata, here in the body, just as we would say the seat of love resides here in the heart. Of course, it doesn't reside in the knee. If you think logically, where would you say love resides? Its seat here in the heart. Similarly, the seat of ego is here, ahankara, in the medulla. The seat of the mind, mon, is here up at the top of the head. The seat of buddhi, intellect, is here at the spiritual eye. Now, the spiritual eye is also the seat of willpower. It's the seat of concentration. It's the seat of intellect. These are all here, and you can see, as we have discussed, they're all related to each other, interrelated. The seat of ego is here. Now, this medulla is also very important for another reason. It's said that at this medulla oblongata, it's at this point that the life force of the cosmos, of the universe, that cosmic life force of Om, enters into in the manifestation of life force. Prana enters into the body at that point, and it's from there, enters into the brain and down through the nervous system to animate this body. at the medulla oblongata. The medulla is said at the brain stem that when the sperm and the ovum unite at conception, it's from there that the body is first, the divisional process begins, and the young embryo begins to grow. And you see the pictures of the growth of the embryo. First it begins with the brain and the nervous system, and then from there the body itself begins to form. And it's that essential beginning point. And it's at this point that it gives that life force connection that we have. It's that life force enters into the body, and when we die, the soul passes from this physical plane back to the astral. Typically that life force will then exit out of that medulla point within the body. Now, for the enlightened yogi, it exits elsewhere, here or here. But for the average embodied soul, it exits out at that point. So it's an important point. So we find that through the use of our will, attuning it to divine will, or very strengthening it individually within ourselves to some degree in attunement, we can direct that will and draw into the body supplemental life force from the universe around us. And so great things can be accomplished. We hear stories of the mother who's in times of emergency, perhaps her child is injured, or a car perhaps is on top of a child, and she runs in a moment of panic and is able to lift the car and put it aside. We see these stories in the newspaper from time to time. Where did that energy come? Little small person being able to do such large feats. When your will is concentrated, you find that you can do what seemingly are miracles. And you find that so the will, the greater the will, the greater the focus of that will, the greater the concentration of that will, the greater the flow of energy. And so this is what we want to do through the various practices of learning to become, at the first step, become aware of that energy. Feel yourself to be an embodiment of energy. Feel it as if it's moving in your spine. It's moving when you do an action. Do not do it unconsciously. Feel that the energy is moving. When you relax, feel as if you're withdrawing that energy. You are energy. And feel that. Feel that within yourself and act that way. And then be controlled with that energy. Be centered in that energy. And you'll find that you learn to control the flow of that energy. Now, there are exercises, as I mentioned. Yogananda's energization exercises is a form of pranayama. It's the same way. We can do other exercises as well. All of yoga, on some level, particularly the practices of yoga, have at their root this concept of learning to become aware of life force. Hatha yoga is learning to be able to move in such a way gracefully. Feel the energy within you as you assume a posture. Feel it as you do an action. It's going out. Feel it withdrawing. When we meditate, what we're doing is we're learning to, through our concentration here at the point between the eyebrows, begin to withdraw that life force from the senses. And so this is what we're doing. And we have to be able to use that will, but use the will not in the form of tension. People often mistake this. They think of will as willpower, and willpower means a furrowed eyebrows and tension. We don't mean it that way at all. We mean it in sense of concentration. I remember something that Swami Kriyananda once said in definition. He said, concentration on what is defined as intellect. Concentration upon what ought to be is willpower. Concentration upon what ought to be. But so if we concentrate, then we begin to focus that life force. Now, don't think of it in terms of grim willfulness. I think a better word to use to control your will, think of it in terms of willingness, to be willing to do something. This is another way to look at it. To be willing is to be open to doing that which needs to be done. You'll find that yes, sometimes you have to direct your energy this way, but oftentimes the grimness comes from the lack of willingness. A situation, I think one of Swami Kriyananda's favorite stories that he had, of course, many favorite stories, which I heard many times, but this is one he often told. He said, if you stay up late one night and you have friends over, you have a big meal, you have create quite a few dishes in the sink in the kitchen, you've pulled food out and you've created a mess in your kitchen, let's say, and it's late at night, and you look at it late at night and you don't have the energy because it's late, you're tired, you don't have the energy to clean up the kitchen and make the house nice and clean again, neat, properly ordered. So you go to bed and you get up the next day and you come in the morning, you come into the kitchen and you've just woken up, and so you're fairly refreshed, but you look at the kitchen, you say, oh my God, look at the mess here, and immediately you feel your energy going down, and you just say, I just can't face it, and you walk away, and you're tired immediately. Your telephone rings, you answer, and it's an old friend who's just come into town, and you haven't seen this friend for perhaps many years, and the friend says, let's get together, let's go to lunch. I'd love to see you. Let's meet at such a place. And immediately you say, yes, that's a great idea. Let's go. I'll get into the car and we'll have a great time today. And all of a sudden you have tons of energy. You're full of energy. Where did that come from? Whereas a moment before you were tired because you saw what was in front of you. The situation is simply a matter of your willingness to do something. If we can overcome that tendency of the mind to block out what is before us and to say no to life's challenges, that if we can learn to moderate that, to be able to dial it down, as they say, we learn that all of a sudden the blockages to that energy are removed, and we have tremendous amounts of energy. When we want to do something, we have energy. When we do not want to do something, we don't. When we're controlled by our likes and dislikes, we find ourselves in that cycle. Now, one answer to that might be is to always do those things that you like. Well, we know life isn't conveniently arranged that way, and we find that there's always going to be those things that perhaps are, if we have strong likes, we're going to have strong dislikes as well. So my experience has been in the moderation of this, is to become willing, is to overcome that tendency to not like things, the dislikes. I find if you can moderate your dislikes, the willingness to do something, to like other things, that side will take care of itself. Many people approach yoga with this thought of, I cannot like anything. Oh, it's a nice piece of cake in the refrigerator, I can't like that. And they begin to block out those things that they like, and they tend to become grim and a little bit of a sour disposition when they take that approach. I'd say don't worry about it. Don't go that side. Rather, moderate those things that you don't like and get rid of them so that you don't have these strong negative reactions. Get rid of the negative and you'll find that the positive will take care of itself. Swami Kriyananda once met a sadhu who was quite elderly. He was 130 years old, said to be. And so obviously this man must have had something going for him. But the man was a very stern sadhu, and he had that approach of not liking anything. And so Swamiji once asked him about this. He says, "Isn't it okay? Isn't it right? What about a beautiful sunset? What is wrong with that?" And the sadhu said, "No, not even that. Don't like anything on the out. Don't direct your attention to anything on the outside." And Swamiji didn't say anything at that, but in his mind, the thought crossed him, how very dry that approach is. And you do find it that way. It's not that it's wrong, but it tends to be a bit dry. Swamiji's way, and this was Yogananda's way, was to embrace, be expansive in his outlook, enjoy the good things of life. The sattvic things of life. Enjoy the sattvic things of life. The beauty of a sunset, for example. The wonderful feeling of seeing positive things in life. Enjoy those. Be expansive. Share them with other people to have this outward expansive attitude. But yet, see if you can overcome that no-saying principle in your life to have to dislike something. I don't like that. I don't like that. Moderate it, and just accept that what it comes, and do the needful, as we all have our duties in life. You don't have to like your duties, but overcome the tendency to dislike them, and I think you'll find your life begins to moderate. Cultivate a willing attitude. Now, isn't it, those of you who work in, let's say, an office where there's other people, or anybody who needs to work with other people and to be in a social environment, if you go to a co-worker and you say, "Oh, will you help me on this?" And one person says, "Yes, I'm glad to help you." He says, "Yes." How does that make you feel? Toward that person, about the situation in general, you feel good. That person is willing. You know also, I'm sure all of us have met the other side. Some people, you ask them anything and immediately say, "No, they're unwilling." And if you look closely at people who have a tendency to be unwilling, there's a certain tamasic energy associated with that. They somehow cannot generate enthusiasm for something. There's a blockage. And so don't be that way. Don't be that way. When something comes to you of itself, and it's a proper thing, now obviously don't be willing to do something, a negative thing, or something that's adharmic, but if it's a proper thing or it's a neutral thing, be willing. Say yes. And you'll find that your energy will be released. There's a blockage that happens when we become unwilling. We say, "I don't want to do it." That blockage is here. There's a blockage, a tenseness, a tightness in that negative pole of this chakra. And whenever you have that tightness there, any accentuation of I, ego, negativity that blocks, you'll find that the flow of life force into your life will begin to diminish. And you'll find that as that happens, you begin to close in on yourself and you become less expansive. Say yes to life is what Swami would say, and you'll find that things go smoother. You become magnetic. You begin to draw life force to yourself, or you begin to draw in life force. Not only that, you begin to draw opportunities to you. Now, I want to, in this last portion of this discussion, I want to mention how some of this relates to a deeper aspect of yoga, pranayama, and to this life force within us as we practice Raja Yoga. We know I've been using the word prana for life force, but we also know that word pran is associated with breath. And we speak of various life currents within the spine. The inhalation of the breath is the pran current that rises in the spine, and the exhalation is the apan current that descends in the spine. These are associated with nerve channels in the spine. The two nerve channels of the Irda and the Pingala are said to be in the spine, in this deep astral spine. In the Irda, the upward flow of the prana current rises as we inhale, and in the Pingala, there's a downward flow of life force, the Apan current in the Pingala. And these two movements are taking place from the moment of our birth until the time of our death, this up and down movement within the spine. Now, whenever we feel this upward movement, there's also a feeling of upliftment, is also generally associated with an upward flow. I feel happy, we tend to have an upward feeling of life force, and I feel depressed, there's an outward movement of life force outward in that way. So this up and down movement is very key here in the spine. Now, this science of learning because there's a relationship in our language between prana is used for prana, the breath, prana is life force, there is a connection between these two. It's said that when the life force in these nerve channels of the Irda and Pingala moves, the external breath is the expression, the outward expression of the movement of these currents. It's not that our breath controls the currents, it's that the currents control the breath. So you see, if we can learn to become aware of the currents, we can begin to control that breath. But at the same way, if we learn, we can use the breath to also influence the movement of those currents. So there's an interrelationship between these. Now, very interestingly, physiologically, where the breath is controlled, we don't think about breathing. We forget about it, but we breathe nevertheless. There is an impulse that controls the breath physiologically that is centered in the medulla oblongata. The brainstem sends a signal to control the breath. It's the same thing as well as with the heart. The heart beats, and there's a relationship through the nerves to the medulla, this brainstem. Now, interestingly, as we mentioned, the brain stem, the medulla oblongata, is also the seat of ego. Now, this is why in yoga there is a relationship between ego, these movements of life force in the Irda and the Pingala, and the breath itself. And so as we learn to moderate and calm the breath, we find that this also has an effect of our sense of ego consciousness. Ego, the identification of the body, with the identification with the body. As we begin to moderate the breath and internalize that breath and become aware of that prana, we begin to moderate that ego consciousness as well. It's difficult to approach the ego directly, the sense of I-ness. How do we influence it? Through our actions and our consciousness, yes, but we can do it very directly, or is it indirectly? But one way we can do it through the use of the breath. And so consequently, this is why we began our meditation practices with a discussion of Hong Sa, of learning to concentrate, and through the practice of Hong Sa, of watching the breath, learning to slow the breath down, and eventually being able to stop the breath. You'll find that in the practice of Hong Sa, that everybody to some degree notices a slowing and a calming of the breath. And in that you begin to feel peace. But you'll also notice that if you practice deep enough, there will become pauses in the breath itself. Between the exhalation and the next inhalation, that period of time will begin to expand. And there's sometimes a noticeable amount of time will go by between one exhalation and the next inhalation. In that moment of pause, feel the peace there and become aware of the stillness at that time. In time, that pause will increase even further. And you'll see that in the practice of Hong Sa, what we are doing is we're learning as the breath becomes calm, the senses begin, the prana that is going out to the senses begins to withdraw. It begins to move away from the senses, which is another way of saying away from ego identification with the body. And as this begins to happen, the ego begins to moderate, you might, or soften, and our awareness of ourselves as ego begins to become less, and we begin to become aware of ourselves in a deeper sense. We begin to withdraw and go into the deeper spine, into that inner kingdom that is spoken of by all of the great scriptures. Go into that inner kingdom of the spine. And this is the science of Kriya Yoga, which we will go into in the latter lessons of this Raja Yoga discussion. So this relationship between breath and prana is very key. And I encourage you, now that we're into the 5th or 6th lesson here, to develop your daily practice of meditation. At the same time, practice those exercises that you've learned, those energization exercises, and learn to increase the will. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. But it's not just the outward expression of the energy. Try to feel the life force moving within the body. Try to feel yourself to be energy. Try to feel yourself to be life force. And then you'll find that as that awareness begins to grow within you, your sense of who and what you are will begin to expand. And as that expansion takes place in our awareness, expansion of our sense of being, there's something that accompanies a sense of expansion of awareness. It's a sense of joy. Where there's joy, there tends to be expansion. Where there's expansion, there is usually a feeling of joy, a feeling of bliss. Your sense of self is larger. So this is what we want to be practicing now. There's one more point, I'll come back to it, that we are going to address in a later lesson. We have energy, we have awareness, we have great will. Learning to attune that will to something higher than simply the ego, divine will. And this is to properly use our energy, to properly use our will, and to properly be able to supplement the little energy that we have within us with the cosmic energy of the cosmos. We need to learn to attune our will to something beyond the ego, to divine will. But this is a discussion we'll leave for a future lesson. For now, let's practice what we have, go deeper into it, and experience for ourselves that feeling of energy that comes to us in the practice of yoga. Many blessings, and I'll see you again next week, where we're going to continue this discussion of energy to its logical accompaniment, which is the discussion of magnetism. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. And the implications of that we'll discuss in our next lesson. Namaste.